Ladies and gents, I've got an incredible guest here today and really excited to have her on. Goes by the name of Dr. Stephanie Estima. I always mess up the pronunciations there. But before I don't want to give people like a generic kind of boring read from your website. I'd love to you just introduce yourself to the audience, Steph. Really, really excited to have you on. And as I was saying, it's like 6:30 p.m. where you're at, right? So I appreciate you coming on this late. Probably
Thank
getting
you.
close to your bedtime, I would imagine, Steph, right?
It's starting, yeah, it's starting to. I've just had my dinner and now I'm going to start winding down for the evening. But I'm so blessed and grateful and honored to be on your show. Thank you for inviting me on. And just for your listeners, if you haven't heard of me, I'm a physician, doctor of chiropractic, who has a special interest in the neuromuscular skeletal system and how specifically and how that applies to women. So I'm very interested in how women age, how we can age well. I don't believe in the word anti-aging. I think we have the privilege of aging, so how we can age well utilizing I have a bit of a framework. So meals, how we can optimize our meals, our muscle, our mindset as we're going through that perimenopausal and menopausal transition. So, and I use my training from my undergrad in neuroscience and psychology through my professional training to apply that to women worldwide.
Incredible, incredible. My eyes just lit up then when you mentioned like neuroscience and
Yeah, yeah.
the neuromuscular stuff and everything else. It really fascinates me. But I love you because it wasn't something you kind of fell into, right? And you've got a personal story of your own with what you dealt with, right? In terms of
Yes.
menopause and stuff like that. I'd love for you to
Yeah.
share that with the audience and what kind of inspired you to really, fine tune what you're doing with, the specific things you're helping people with.
For sure. Yeah. So I actually wrote a book about it. It's called The Betty Body and named after like you, have a podcast called Better with Dr. Stephanie. And my fans, we lovingly call them our Bettys. So I wrote a book called The Betty Body, and it was really detailing how women in their fertile years, so in the perimenopausal years as well, because we still have our menstrual cycle during that time, how we can optimize training, how we can optimize nutrition in accordance with the menstrual cycle. And really the focus there was that women are not men. We're not small men. We're not like smaller archetypes of men with like pesky hormones. We are very different over the course of a month, whereas I lovingly call, men are like the sun and women are like the moon, where men will sort of cycle through their hormones on a daily basis, primarily are their sex hormones, and women will cycle through their sex hormones over the course of a month. And very closely follows the lunar cycle. And so I wrote a book about that. My own personal story to your original question was that I struggled with my menstrual cycle for years and years and years and years and years. And I always felt like it was a curse. I always wanted to ignore it. I always wanted to white knuckle my way through the last 2 weeks of my cycle. And it really wasn't until I understood, there's a whole story that I detail in the book, but went to Italy and I was going through a divorce. My clinic had burned down. So, like, everything in my life had sort of unraveled. My personal life was unraveling. I had two very small children. So, if anybody's ever gone through a divorce or a breakup, you know how heart-wrenching and how emotionally stressful that is. And then you throw in young children into the mix who are, asking why mommy and daddy are no longer living in the same house anymore. I mean, that's stressful in and of itself. And then, of course, when it rains, when it rains, it pours, as they say. And my clinic also, there was an electrical fire one night. The clinic burned down, and then I had to sort of scramble to find a temporary space to see my patients, et cetera. So my stress levels were through the roof, as you might imagine. My menstrual cycle, my pain was very much upregulated, very much brain fog, joint pain, sleep disturbances, all the things, and went to Italy for a summer holiday with my boys, with my two young children. And over the course of that vacation, over the course of that time, was getting regular sunlight and, 15 to 20,000 steps a day, and having food that was locally grown, or at least not, marinating in glyphosate and marinating in all the pesticides that you tend to see in, at least in North America or North American foods. And I felt amazing. Got my period while I was, in Italy, and felt incredible. I felt like a goddess. I felt like I was just cleansing. And I really made a promise to myself and my patients that I would figure out how, I mean, you can say, yes, everything's better in Italy. You can have gelato and the carbs don't count and all that great stuff. But there was something fundamental that I was doing differently there that I wasn't doing back home. So bringing some of those habits back to my life in Toronto, Canada, which is where my practice was and where I live. And that was sort of the beginning of the book, really like the origin story, if you will, of the book. And I was also in the clinic. We were not only dealing with pain management, we were also running nutrition programs, we were running rehab programs, body composition programs, and noticing very soon after coming back from Italy that there was a very big difference when we would give the same stimulus, we'd give the same diet plan to a husband and wife couple that were signing up for, let's say, a nutrition program. Very different outcomes, very different prognosis from the man and the woman. So started playing around with how can we change how a woman eats over the course of her cycle? How can we change in clinic, how she's treated based on where she is in her cycle? How can we change her rehab? How can we change her exercise based on where she is in her cycle? So that's a long answer, Martin, to your question, but that is how I got started, and that's where a lot of my work lies is in female physiology and how that sort of ebbs and flows over the month and how we can adapt to it.
Love it. Yeah, I can't wait to send this podcast to my clients. And also, I need to get your book. Should have probably read it before I came on. That would have made more sense, actually. But
Let me send you a copy. I'd be happy to send you one.
oh, thank you. And I'll get my girlfriend to read it as well. She's only like 32 right now, but it's good to learn from other people's like exactly what you've been through. And then this is your expertise now as well. And it's interesting what you said there about what I'd like to do anyway, before I get carried away and too excited. With the start of it in terms of perimenopause, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was there, now looking back, knowing what you know now, because I know it was a shock, right? You went to Italy, came on your period. It wasn't like planned to just happen, right? Because of the change in what you're eating,
Oh yeah, it
lifestyle.
was just that time I was there for 3 weeks. It was going to happen anyway, right? It was
Exactly.
just
But
going to happen. Yeah.
knowing what you know now, exactly. Yeah, it was just going to happen. Yeah, it was just meant to be, wasn't it? But how old were you at that point, by the way? Sorry, when you went to
Gosh, let me see. That was 2018. So, my God, I don't know how old I
asking a
was.
woman
I
her
was,
age. I've only
yeah,
just met you.
like
That
30,
was an
like
error.
30, maybe 38. I want to say 38,
Okay.
39. Yeah,
Okay, cool. So with perimenopause and symptoms and things that people like women, I know there's a lot of variance, but know
sure.
what you know now, when you look back, was there anything leading up to that, let's say a few years before, any signs or symptoms that you had before you went that knowing what you know now, you would have gone, okay, that was interesting. Didn't pick up on that.
Yeah, I would say that my every month my periods were so I would have I sort of jokingly but also not jokingly say that I had like one good week out of the month. So I had, the week after my period stopped, I had that sort of pre-ovulatory week where I felt great. And then, for women who know, the 4 weeks of the cycle, at the end of that week you ovulate, so you release the egg, and then there's this second half of the cycle called the luteal phase where if you are under too much chronic stress, if you're not eating the right foods, if you're not training the right way, if you're not getting enough sleep or proper sleep for your needs at that time, you can very much upregulate a lot of the inflammatory. Like if you were going to feel any type of PMS, it's going to be in the second half of the cycle. So I personally would feel I felt very inflamed for the 2 weeks leading up to my period. Would have to take, all of the, pain medications, and I would try to power through it. I wasn't listening to my body. And then, of course, the week of my period, all of the cramping and the prostaglandins that, when the uterus is sort of contracting to release the lining, the endometrial lining, was very painful. Again, still on pain medication to be able to participate in my activities of daily living. So, for me, I would say I didn't have signs of, let's say, perimenopause, where, although to be honest, there's a lot of parallels, right? So like a lot of depression, a lot of hopelessness, a lot of sleep disturbances, joint pain, all these things we actually see, for a woman who's in her fertile years. If you are someone who does experience PMS, if you're someone who does in that week 3 or week 4 of your cycle, feel very agitated, feel very inflamed, it can for these women predict what that menopausal transition will look like. There's almost like a little mini menopause every month for our beautiful women who are in their fertile years, because in week 4 we see these hormones sort of peak. So we see progesterone and estrogen peak towards the end of week 3, beginning of week 4, and then there's a very abrupt fall off, right? Which is what menopause is. There's a very sudden and dramatic drop in progesterone and estrogen in menopause. So if you are feeling like absolute garbage every month in that second half of the cycle, it can be predictive. It's not always accurate, right? Because you can implement lifestyle changes as I have, and there's other, there's things that are within your control. But if you continue to do nothing about it, it can be predictive of that menopausal transition. So a lot of parallels. So as I mentioned, like sleep disturbances, inflammation, joint pain, brain fog, mood and affect, very emotional. All of those things were very consistent for me every single month.
And I love what you said there about the menstrual cycle, because I always communicate to my female clients literally two different physiologies, right? At different parts when you're
Right.
going up to menstruation. And then, like you said, after that, generally I see the same patterns. Generally, my female clients feel stronger. Obviously, estrogen levels spike and stuff, right? Leading up to the ovulation. And yeah, it
Yeah.
makes a massive, like it's night and day difference, right? Even in terms of food, you have the PMS generally leading up to the menstruation, right? And
And even motor coordination, like you probably see with your clients, that it's optimal to introduce a new movement pattern to a woman in her follicular phase. So in either bleed week or pre-ovulation, just because she is essentially firing on all cylinders. We're seeing peaking, as you mentioned, of estradiol. We're seeing peaking, like testosterone also works on a lunar or a monthly cycle for women. So we see testosterone peaking at about day 10 or so for women. So you'll see these anabolic hormones, estrogen and testosterone, peak for a woman in typically like somewhere between day 7 and 12. So we just like split the difference and say around day 10. So her motor coordination is also going to be amplified, right? So she's able to learn new tasks, new movement tasks better in her follicular phase than she might in her luteal phase.
wow, that's super fascinating. Really fascinating. So, what would you say, right? The biggest struggles in terms of perimenopause now, we'll start there. The biggest
Yeah.
struggles, right? And the things that I know you've just touched on a lot of this, but specific things. I know you mentioned, muscle, mindset, meals. Let's
Mhm.
perhaps go through each one of those there, because I know with training, like different stages is very different for guys, isn't it? Right? It's kind of a lot more linear as we age in terms of what we need to do with our training and everything else. Obviously, our testosterone levels naturally drop, yada yada yada. With females, is a drastic change, right? So if we track back to a woman in their 20s, for example, right? Generally, I would imagine as they get older, they would have to, I guess, focus even more on kind of strength to maintain that strength as they get older, right? Because especially when menopause kicks in, bone density, all those kind of things, losing lean body mass and stuff like that. So if we start with the training, what do you
Yeah.
think people need to, like, in general, going through I guess we could go perimenopause and then menopause. In general, how does that look? Because you see Orange Theory as well, like Steph, things like Orange Theory, CrossFit, they're marketed towards women who are getting older, they're middle-aged women and stuff like that. But it's like that really, I would argue, is not going to be ideal when it comes to longevity and even metabolism and the goals that a lot of people struggle with at that age, right? Which is kind of fat loss and stuff.
Yeah. I would say that irrespective of how old you are, you could be 25 listening to the show, 35, 45, 55. If you are a woman and you have the privilege of going through menopause, like 100% of women will go through perimenopause and menopause, right? So menopause is one day in your life. It means that you've gone 12 consecutive months without a menstrual cycle, without a period. And so 100% of women will go through this, right? So it would behoove you to get your ducks in a row now. So if you are 25, you can start working on, and your point is well taken around strength. I would say that strength and muscle mass very closely correlated. So typically, the more muscle mass you have, the stronger you are. But through training that those can be two different outcomes, right? So you can train differently for strength and you can train differently for muscle hypertrophy. I would say that one of the biggest things that we can do as women is to build quality tissue, quality contractile tissue, which is muscle, right? So my focus, of course, you can also add in strength as an objective. And I think to stay strong over the course of your life is an incredible feat. And I would say that as your anabolic hormones decline, and in particular, so testosterone will not decline as acutely as we see estrogen and progesterone declining. We see like literally like they fall off a cliff to 1% of their previous levels. But estrogen is very much an anabolic hormone, and as I've mentioned, and there's receptors for estrogen and testosterone all throughout the body. right? They're not just sex hormones. We see estrogen receptors in the brain, on the heart. One of the reasons why we women in our fertile years are so protected against things like cardiovascular disease is because of the amount of estradiol that we have. And so as we lose that through that menopausal transition, it becomes even more important for us to have another regulatory mechanism in the body. And that is going to be as much muscle mass as you can. And if you are not strategic, maybe working with yourself or other knowledgeable coaches and trainers around how to build muscle. Whether you're 25, 35, 45, 55, you are going to be, as the saying goes, like, as the tide goes out, caught with your pants, something like that. Like your pants are down as the tide goes out.
I know what you're trying to say. Yeah, yeah.
I'm trying to, I'm totally butchering
It
that, but
sounds great. It sounds great. Anyway, I like it.
So the primary objective for a woman who is starting to think about perimenopause or menopause is to think about resistance training as the primary objective for her in the gym. So, the purple hypothesis, the orange theory, the, whatever, like that is all really focused around high intensity interval training, which I think is important. I think VO2 max training is very important, and it becomes important in that perimenopausal transition because we also lose VO2 max. But so many women who are, in doing the orange theory, I always kind of joke and say like the purple hypothesis, not to like call out one company, but like the F45s and all of that. They're going 3, 4, 5, 6 times a week. And that is completely inappropriate. That is absolutely driving up, and then a lot of women will concurrently say, oh, I don't know why I'm getting this belly fat. Like I'm eating the same thing. I'm doing the same thing that I did when I was 25 or 35. And all of a sudden now I have a muffin top or I have this belly fat in my, through my midsection. And part of that is because you're killing yourself 5 days a week at doing high intensity interval training. You can certainly do HIIT training, but I would counsel most women in perimenopause and menopause to do it no more than once, twice maximally per week. There are so, like, if you're thinking about a movement program, the base, if there's like if there's a base, the base should be resistance training. And then you can layer on the zone 2 stuff. You can layer on the high intensity interval training. After that, maybe some stretch, if you're trying to work on the pliability of the tendons and the joints and making sure that you're maintaining full range of motion. That's also important. So the Pilates and the yoga. But the base of your work, like the majority of your work, should be in the weight section of the gym.
And you know what's interesting? It's funny you say that because really it looks the same across the board, right? Like you said, you just simplified it then. If we focus on strength training just in general, right, regardless of age, make that, I would say, the cornerstone of what you're doing, right? Because building lean
Yeah.
muscle tissue and everything else and all the
Yeah.
other effects, right? Heart health, all that kind of stuff. But I have clients, the biggest challenge I face, Steph, right, is clients that I have middle age, maybe late 40s, 50s, and they say and so many women now, what you said, they're going to be like, that's me, gaining body fat around the midsection, stubborn fat, which they didn't have when they were younger. And all of a sudden it's just come
Yeah.
on almost out of
Yeah.
the blue, it feels like. And
Yeah.
trying to get that woman to change her mindset and switch up the way she's training, it's
Yeah.
such a process, and it's so because they've done loads of cardio, they're fit and they're healthy. A lot of these women are actually healthy that I take on as well, and they're fit and they're relatively lean. But what they were doing before is just simply not working. And in fact, it's really going against them. But then to get them to switch over the strength training and trust the process, because it doesn't happen overnight, as you know, Steph, right? With losing stubborn body fat and everything else, it's really, really challenging. Not to mention, a lot of people, as you know, have struggled their whole life with weight loss, or they've gained weight and lost it. They've done, yo-yo dieting, a lot of them, and different types of diets, extreme diets, which have kind of added on to that problem then of stress hormones elevated and everything else, and then obviously, fat gain.
The thing with cardio, and this is what I want every woman to understand, is cardio, if you're on the elliptical, you're on the treadmill, Stairmaster, whatever it is, and you're doing it for 35, 45, 55, 65 minutes, whatever it is per session, you're going to get really good. Your body's going to get really good and adapt to whatever stimulus you give it. So if you are giving it primarily a cardiovascular stimulus, your body's going to say, okay, so I need to get better at moving quickly, right? So I need to pare down the things that are weighing me down. And so often what you'll see is a woman will get smaller. And for those of you that are maybe watching this on video, I'm using air quotes, right? So she's getting smaller, but she's sacrificing her contractile tissue. She's sacrificing muscle in order to get smaller. So is it fat loss that's happening while she's doing the cardio, or is it weight loss? It's probably once she's been, she's on that cardio machine for 45 or, 60 minutes or whatever, she's also paring down muscle for her to become more efficient at that activity. And so over time, what can happen is, when we look at body composition, so that can be done by calculating her fat-free mass, it can be done by impedance, it can be done by caliper, all the ways that you might, assume or like to be able to evaluate adiposity in a person. If you are just doing cardio, your whole frame might get smaller, but you are relatively fatter. And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. I just mean that the relative percentage of adipose tissue or fat tissue that you have is going to be greater because you have sacrificed your muscle at the sacrificial altar of weight loss, right? So when we think about weight loss, we really want to be strategic to your point around fat loss. And yes, you have to trust the process. And yes, it takes some time to change your body composition. But I promise you that your body knows what to do. You just have to give her the right stimulus. And you have to do that consistently over, a delta over a period of time. And you will have muscle cell turnover and your net muscle growth is going to exceed your net muscle breakdown, right? So this is also something that we have to consider when we're doing excess amounts of cardio. You may feel really great, right? You may have that endorphin rush after, a HIIT training because it feels like you almost died. So you're just like relieved that you're still alive. Or even if you're just, participating in a lot of zone 2, zone 3, zone 4 cardiovascular exercise, understand that you are also sacrificing muscle there as well. And as we age, that really is the currency that we have to maintain. We all talk about, we pay with money, we pay with attention, in the body's sort of currency. The way that we stay healthy is by at least maintaining the very bottom of the barrel is maintaining our muscle mass, but ideally with a regular, well-scripted, well-designed, hypertrophy program, you are adding muscle as you age.
Love it. And there's so much interesting research coming out on this, right? And that's so great the way you explained that, because I've explained it in a million different ways. My audience is probably like, yeah, he talks about the cardio thing all the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you've delivered it in a different way, which I love. But yeah, I think you've obviously heard of Dr. Gabrielle Lyons. You've probably done a collaboration with
She's
her.
a good friend of mine.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no
Gab's a
doubt.
good friend. Yeah,
No doubt. Yeah, yeah. But obviously, she's been talking about some of the research coming out on this, on the effects on metabolism and stuff. It's very hard to
sure.
measure as well, right? Because people say, oh, you add muscle to your body, it burns 6 to 13 calories. But my calculations, right, Steph, every 4 weeks, if we just focus on strength training, let's just say 50 to 100 calories more, my client's body burns by itself every 4 weeks on average. If you add
Yeah.
that up, like we say, like you just said, you put the time in over a year, all adds up.
That's a lot. It's a lot. And if you're new to resistance training, right, which a lot of women in their 40s and 50s are because we all grew up in the cardio bunny era, you also get to profit from, what's called the newbie gains, right? So when you're new to training, the gains that you make, right? Like the muscle, the strength
Same.
gains, the hypertrophy gains that you get in the first, let's say 12 to 16 weeks are astonishing. And so if you were to compare my gains, let's say now training for, the decades that I have versus someone who just starts this week, in 12 weeks, that person is far going to outpace my changes because my muscle cells have already turned over. So they turn over now at a much slower rate. So the other beautiful thing about when you start training is you can almost immediately see, maybe you don't see changes in, the shape initially, but you will see the weight, like the weight that you're able to press or pull or squat or whatever, is going to change dramatically over those 12 weeks. And that, I think, for a lot of the type A personality, like the high achieving, very driven, very ambition oriented women, can be really addicting because you can say, oh, okay, so I started curling, I don't know, let's say I started curling 10 pounds or whatever, 4 kilos with biceps. And then by the end of, 10 weeks, you can be up to 15 pounds or gosh, I don't know what that is in kilos offhand, maybe 8, maybe 7
Well
kilos.
calculated. Yeah, about six or
Yes. Yeah, 6 or 7. So
seven.
that's like
Yeah,
that's a huge gain.
yeah,
And
it's
it's
insane.
so motivating, right? So, and that's the other thing I've noticed this with myself. This is also with women that I've counseled and cared for. You'll often see strength changes. So your ability to push or pull more weight initially before you start seeing these sort of aesthetic changes, like the new muscle tissue on the body. So if you're starting to see strength changes, it's like the gains are near, right? Like you're about to see like bigger biceps or, more popping booty or, whatever it is that you're working.
And speaking of addictions, right? I wanted to touch on this. It's a mindset thing, right? Because a lot of people are actually addicted to the feeling they get from cardio, right? It's almost like whether it's a
Yeah.
spike of cortisol, whatever it is, and it makes you feel good, and that's great, right? It's all about mental health, really. But for the purpose of what you want to achieve, if you want to lose fat, you want to live longer, all that kind of stuff, you have to kind of like you just said, trust the process of lifting weights. And when you put enough, and like you say, 12 weeks, especially with newbie gains, significant results. And I even see people actually build muscle and lose a bit of fat. Now, you can't guarantee
Of
that. It really
course.
depends. But as the metabolism speeds up and then, starts going in the right direction, you see that happen. But one thing I wanted to touch on there as well was, but Gab, it's going to make me bulky though when I build muscle, right? Imagine I'm a
Oh
female now,
yeah.
right? I
Gosh,
don't
yeah.
want to lift heavy, right? Because I
Yeah.
don't want to
Yeah.
be big and bulky.
Well, I'll tell you this. I have been training for, I don't know, gosh, I started really lifting weights very seriously in like 2007. I still am waiting to become bulky. Like I'm still waiting. And I
Exactly
think
the same. 2 decades for me, and I'm still waiting.
it's like a girl can dream, right? Like that's sort of like I would love to be bulky. The amount of work that a woman has to put in to become bulky. I mean, we just don't have the hormonal profile, right? We just don't have the amount of like we have testosterone is the dominant sex hormone in the female body. We have more testosterone than we do estrogens, specifically the dominant one, estradiol. But when we compare the amount of testosterone that we have to our beautiful male counterparts as yourself, such as yourself, that's going to be like, 10 to 20 times less, right? So this idea of bulky, I don't want to get bulky. It's like, it's really antiquated. There's no, it's very interesting actually. The word I interviewed someone, her name is Alyssa Ages, who would be actually a great interview for you. I'd be happy to introduce you. But she was on my show and she is a strong woman. So she was competing in a lot of these strongmen competitions. And she looked up the word bulky because she's like, why is this word like we like guys don't talk about getting bulky, right? It's just the girls that are talking about getting bulky. And it means taking up space often inconveniently. Like that's the definition of bulky.
Taking up space often inconveniently.
Right.
Funny
And
one.
but culturally, if we think about culturally, women are often like, "Smart, how are you? Oh, I'm great. How are you?" And it's like your life could be unfurling like a ball of yarn behind you, but you're always going to be like, "I'm great. How are you?" Right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, exactly.
women are not really allowed to take up space, to be inconvenient, to ask questions. And this is sort of why I'm so happy to be part of this sort of menopause. Like, I feel like perimenopause and menopause is almost having a moment now because for years, so many women had to suffer in silence without hormone replacement therapy, without, having physicians like absolutely dismiss their concerns. Like, here's a script for an antidepressant. Here's a script for a statin, like get out of my office and next. So I think that it's almost ingrained for women. It's like, oh, I don't want to be inconvenient. I don't want to take up space, right? But that's actually your job. Your job as you age is to take up space. And even though it will be next to impossible for you to do that physically, you should still aim for that. Like lift as heavy a weight as you can in a range of motion that you can own, and then aim for. And I'm sure you've talked about this on your show. This idea of progressive overload and working the muscle close to failure. You don't have to go to failure, although I'm someone who thinks that it's important to know what failure feels like. So here and there,
This
you
is a
can kind
good
of
point.
push it and see, yeah, like, yeah, to kind of see what it feels like. But um, 99.9% of women are not going to get bulky from training. Like there are some outliers, there are some women who are like more androgen dominant who just naturally are always ripped. They've had a six pack since they were, since coming out of the womb. Um, so if that's you, very likely that you can put on weight easily, but that's a beautiful thing.
Definitely. And I use my girlfriend as an example for clients and stuff like that. 'Cause she's got a lot of lean muscle mass, and just this is looking at Steph now, right? A lot of people watching this on YouTube. You can see you look lean, you look sculpted. All those words that women love, right? Sculpted,
Yeah.
toned, tight.
Toned. I look toned.
Tone's
Yeah.
the best one in there. That one, it just hits the nail on the head. But you look toned though, right? If I look at you, and that's because
Yeah.
you got a lot of lean muscle mass, and you're
Yeah.
lean because you've done this for so long. And obviously nutrition plays a huge part in that. But you
True.
can get away. I bet you can get away with a lot of food as well, right, Steph? I would assume.
Well, that's kind of the nice thing
Not,
about it too. So I love
yeah,
food, right? My background is
same.
Portuguese and Lebanese. Like my parents are from, the old country. They're from Portugal and from the Middle East. So like we love our food. And so it does allow me to have more calories because my muscles are metabolically active tissue, right? It's the primary site for glucose disposal and glucose utilization and fat utilization. So of course, yeah, I get to eat more, which is, win-win for me, win-win for me as well, because I love my food.
It's a huge win, is don't we all? You know what I mean? Don't we
Yeah.
all? I can get away with a lot as
Yeah.
well now after 2 decades of training. But yeah, my great
Yeah.
granddad is from Madeira, the Portuguese
Oh
island.
yeah, Madeira.
That's my
Yeah.
surname
Yeah.
Silva. Yeah, but that's about as far as
Love
my
it. I
Portuguese. I
actually thought
can't.
that. I was like, oh, Silva, this guy must be Portuguese. I was thinking that maybe, but I didn't ask. But
No, no, no.
yeah.
I'm actually because my girlfriend's Brazilian, so I've actually started learning Portuguese last year, but I fell off the
Awesome.
wagon. I need to get back on top of that, so I'm going back to my roots.
Awesome.
But yeah, I just wanted to I think by the way, I think I called you Gab earlier as well because I had it in my notes. So sorry about that. I think one of might
Oh,
have said,
that's okay.
"Look,
Actually, a
Gab."
lot
I
of
think I
people
said,
confuse us. It's funny. A lot of people, I think it's just the dark hair, and we both talk about weights and stuff. A lot of people will call me Gabrielle,
thanks.
and I think she's told me the same. People call her Stephanie too. But yes, yes, it's fine. It's
That
good.
makes me
All
that
good.
makes me feel a lot better. Thanks for making me feel better. But no, with nutrition, right, and meals, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
it's different, right? Because I've like looked into this a lot, and generally, obviously, there's a lot of variance from person to person, right? We have to speak to the masses, but it looks different, right, from men and women, and especially in terms of carb intake. And I've noticed intermittent fasting. I know you put a great post up actually recently with intermittent fasting versus calorie restriction. There's a big
Yeah.
difference, in general between men and women, and also as women go through the cycle of changes,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, I would say this is somewhere that I've changed my opinion on. So I used to be a big, 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 big advocate for fasting. And I still think that there's a lot of uses for fasting if it works for you. So if you find fasting a useful tool, it helps with your sleep. You find that you're able to control your calories. I think that fasting can be a useful tool. But what I find has happened is there's this perseveration in the online space, as there sometimes can be, around fasting is this like has magical powers. It's going to autophagy this and, gut reset that. And while I do think that fasting can really help with bowel rest, right? So just giving the gut a chance to sort of repair itself. There are a lot of ways, particularly with autophagy, which is, when you hear about people talking about autophagy, it's just a fancy word for, I always liken it to like if you ever played Pac-Man at any point in your life, the Pac-Man sort of eating up all the pellets. That's kind of what's happening at a cellular level. We have these phagocytes that are basically going around and lysing and consuming, bits of cellular debris and pieces of nucleotide and like just stuff that's not working anymore. So fasting can certainly do that. But I don't think that there's any established values or ranges around what is a useful level, like how much autophagy. So if we fast for 12 hours, how much autophagy is happening versus 16 hours versus 24? Certainly it should go up, but by how much? And is it worth it? Is it like, the law of diminishing returns? That's one thing. And then the other thing, of course, is that there are many other things that can upregulate autophagy, like resistance training, right? We are literally turning over our cells, our muscle cells, the
Never
myocytes.
thought about that
Uh,
actually.
of course, yeah. And then, of course, temperature manipulation. So, getting in cold, getting in hot, these are all things that can upregulate autophagy. So, it's not unique. Or, it's not the special secret sauce that fasting alone holds. There are many other ways that we can induce this sort of cleansing, if you will. So fasting, I think, is great as a tool for caloric restriction, as long as we're sort of thinking about it as a tool for caloric restriction. I think as it applies to women, to your original question, um, we were just talking a lot about muscle hypertrophy, strength, and at least maintaining or adding to our muscle tissue as we age. And I think that when we see women, and again, I'm talking to this hyper type A, the overachievers who are like, oh, fasting. Okay, I'm just gonna have one meal a day then. Or fasting. Okay, I'm only gonna start eating at 1 p.m. and then I'm gonna I'm gonna stop eating at 6 or 7 or 8 p.m. or something like that. I think when we age, when we start to move into our 40s and 50s, we tend to become, as a natural consequence of aging, we tend to become more catabolic, right? So there is a higher turnover of everything, of our bones, right? So our osteoblasts and our osteoclasts, these are the cells in the bones that are the blasts are the builders, right? So they build the bone up, and the clasts are the breaker, they break down the bone. So as we age, those cells that are involved in bone breakdown, the clastic activity, can get higher than the blastic activity. The same is true in our muscle tissue. The cells that are involved in net muscle protein synthesis can be less than the cells that are involved in net muscle protein breakdown. And so when we are extending our fasting window for women who are seeing a decline in their anabolic hormones, who are starting to become more catabolic by nature, I often will counsel women, if they still want to fast, to shift their fasting window to earlier in the day. So eat upon waking, like you need to break that sort of catabolic state of sleep. Get at least 30 grams of protein, but first meal, if you can, I'd actually say a little bit north of that. Like I really love 40 to 50 grams for your first meal. And just bring the fasting window so you can stop eating earlier in the day. Maybe you stop eating at 6 or 7 p.m. And then that allows for that, digestive, for you to sort of digest your food and it doesn't begin to affect your sleep. So yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on fasting. I don't know if that answered your question, but I would say that
That's
for
awesome.
women, we want to be gentler with the fasting as well. So men can profit, and I would see this in the clinic all the time. Men would fast for 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, and we'd look at their serum testosterone, and it would be through the roof. Like they would feel great, and they would feel amazing. And women just they wouldn't ovulate, they'd miss their period, they couldn't sleep, they were like riddled with anxiety. Like we're not meant to do the same things as our male counterparts are. So sometimes and I had to learn this myself because I would look in the online space and people that I didn't know, but maybe admired were doing men who were doing longer fasts. I would say, okay, I'm just going to do what he's doing. And of course, would fast for 96 hours and wonder why I didn't ovulate, like wonder why I didn't get my period that month. Well, it's because my oocytes, like the cells of like your ovaries, just as a little like nerdy fact for those of you that might be interested, they have our oocytes for women have the densest amount of mitochondria per per cell in the entire human body. And what I mean by that is if you look at a hepatocyte, so a liver cell, it has about 2,000 mitochondria per cell, which is quite incredible. A heart cell will have about 5,000, somewhere around five, depends on the fitness of the person, but like 5,000 mitochondria per heart cell. An oocyte, or the cells in the ovaries, will have 100,000, right? So your ovaries, ladies, are constantly scanning the environment. They are the eyes in your body that do not connect to your visual cortex. They are constantly scanning the environment. Is she okay to get pregnant this month? Is there enough food? Is there enough resources? Is she stressed? Your ovaries are always scanning the environment. So when you are fasting for 48 hours, 72 hours, 96 hours, your ovaries are like, oh, damn, like there's no food. So this would be a terrible time for her to get pregnant. So let's just not release an egg this month. Let's conserve it and maybe wait for the next month. Maybe think conditions will improve then. So we always want to be thinking about things irrespective of whether you want to get pregnant or not. Your biology is always working that way. So yeah, just something to consider.
Yeah, no, that was gold. I love the way you broke that down then. And with fasting as well, like you said, then people are always looking for the quick fix. If we're honest, right? Most people are like, I want to lose fat yesterday, right? So they're looking at
Yeah,
fasting. But what you said then is, okay, yeah, that can actually help you restrict calories a bit easier in some cases, right? Eating in a smaller window. But
sure.
in general, though, if it's going to make you, because you see with a lot of people going from one extreme to another, they've gone from eating maybe too much processed foods, making them overeat and gain weight, and then they're going to go, right, I'm going to go carnivore now, and I'm going to fast and have one meal a day. You know what I mean? It's like,
Right,
probably not
right,
going to be
right.
ideal, but people they want that fast answer, don't they? So there's no quick
Yeah.
route, and you need and I would just wanted to ask you as well the lowest hanging fruit. I always find, regardless of the age of the person, having optimal protein, right, and having
Yes.
hitting a protein target within itself
Yeah.
consistently. I mean, that
Yeah.
changes a lot.
I think protein has gotten a bad rap for a long time. I think there's a lot of myths around protein. I think that for a woman, and also I think that there's something, I think it's changing now, but for a long time, it's like meat, fire, man, like it's like protein and steak. It's like for the guys, right? And I'll just have like the little rabbit salad over here with the tofu. And there's nothing wrong with tofu, but I'm just, we would shy away from like the barbecue steak, or we'd shy away from a nice big juicy steak versus, having this little rabbit food. And so for women, first of all, I'll say that there's protein in every, like we need the amino acids to be able to assemble every single cell in every single body in the body. So we need protein. And I would say that our protein requirements also change as we age. So our protein requirements actually increase as we age because we are more in that state of catabolism, we're in that state of breakdown. So you need to almost get ahead of it by a mechanical stimulus, which we've talked about, the training, the resistance training. And you can also get ahead of it with a chemical stimulus, right, in the kitchen. So having more protein. Now, I will state my bias. I love animal proteins. So I have the steaks and the chickens and the fish and the lamb and the goat and all that stuff. And I just do it mainly because I'm lazy, because I know that those are complete proteins. And if I were to have, let's say, a tofu or a tempeh or an edamame or a soy protein or something, I know that it's not a complete protein. So I have to sort of figure out what amino acids and in what amounts, and I have to sort of get it from other foods. So animal proteins are just easier. And I have a whole sort of spiel that I can go down in with animal proteins, but I just feel like it's very bioavailable. We don't have to break down the fat. Like if we're having a lot of plant proteins, certainly the protein is less bioavailable as well. And so I would love to encourage women to be thinking about, irrespective of the type of protein. So my bias is animal-based proteins, but you need to be thinking about more protein as you age to get ahead of that catabolic activity that's already occurring as a natural, consequence of aging.
And what would you say? So let's talk on that in terms of how much protein is required generally as women age in particular, when they
Yeah.
get to menopause or whatever, and also with protein is sorry with like any nutrient deficiencies that you like see patterns with, I guess, or things that people should look out for, females, as they get towards that menopause stage.
Sure. Yeah, I would say it depends on your fitness activity, but generally a really great place to start is about 1 gram of protein per ideal pound of body weight. So if you're somebody who, let's say, wants to weigh 150 pounds, you would consume 150 grams of protein in a day. When we're thinking about protein in the diet, the other thing that I'll just make a comment on is a lot of times when we are on a diet, we think about percentages. So if you think about like the zone diet back in the day, it was, I think it was 40, I think it was 40, 30, 30. I forget which one is which, but it was like 40, maybe 40% carbs, 30% fat, 30% protein, something like that. The ketogenic diet was like 70% fat, 20 to 25% protein, and then, whatever the fill is, 5 or 10% carbohydrates. For women in perimenopause and menopause, we want to stop thinking about protein as a percentage of total calories, and we want to pull that out and think about the gram target first. So it is a gram target, not a percentage. So irrespective if you are having 1,500 calories or 2,500 calories, there is a gram target of protein first, and then you back in. Let's say you like to have more fat, then you can kind of back in more fat into the remainder of the calories that are left over. Or if you're more of a high carb kind of person, you can back in, what the calories, the total calories and percentages based on what's left over. But the protein has to come first. And for most women, 1 gram per ideal pound of body weight is a great place to start. In the spirit of transparency and honesty, I eat north of that. So I probably am consuming somewhere between 160 to 100 like depend if it's leg day, it's like I have more protein on leg day. So that's like
Yeah.
170, grams of protein that day. And that's a lot of that is facilitated through whey protein because it's just easier for me to get, a scoop or two is like 25 or 50 grams of protein. So that's the other thing I wanted to say about protein is it is a gram target, not a percentage of your total calories.
Love that. Yeah. And I naturally have like 1.5 grams of protein per pound of my body weight, which is again is
Great.
north, but I
Great.
feel great. I don't get any digestive
Yeah.
issues and stuff. So I think the
Yeah.
least of people's worries is having too much protein. I think most people listening to this. So and it's a good simple number as well, right? A gram per pound of ideal body weight.
Yeah.
If people hit that, I've never seen any issues and people hit that number consistently, naturally you make better decisions as well because it blunts your appetite as well, right? So I think that's the big one.
Absolutely. Yeah. When we think about, the GLP-1s and Ozempic, it's all the rage now. One of the ways that you can really release a lot of endogenous GLP-1 is by consuming protein, right? It is the most satiating macronutrient. I'm sure you've talked about the thermal effect of protein
Mhm.
versus other macros, but if you consume 100 calories, let's say, of protein, because of the energy required to cleave the bonds to be able to liberate the amino acids, you're probably at the end of it, you're probably taking in about 70 calories of
Why
it.
have
So
I
it's
never explained it like that? It's such a simple way to explain it. I always say, like, 10 to 30% more calories is going to burn. And people are like, yeah, whatever. But that's so
yeah,
simple to say, okay, you have 100 calories, roughly about
yeah.
70 calories you're actually consuming.
70 make it in, right? And 30 is sort of
Love
wasted
that.
on,
That's a
liberating the amino
golden point.
acids. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the thermic effect is huge, right? In terms of it takes up a lot of energy to digest and stuff, right? Protein. All right, great. So yeah, just to kind of, I guess, finish off now, I want to really nutrient deficiencies real quick on the nutrition
Oh,
stuff.
yes, yes, thank you. Yeah, so I would say for a lot of women, and of course, this is going to be there's a lot of individuality here. Generally, I would say most women need a magnesium supplement. And that is actually irrespective of perimenopause, whether you're 25 or you're 45, most women need some kind of magnesium. And that is mainly due to the depletion of magnesium levels in the soil and the agriculture. When we think about the agricultural practices, of most countries, I would assume, Australia is probably very similar to Canada and the United States, where they just are reusing the same croplands over and over and over again. So the soil really becomes depleted. And I may be wrong, so feel free to redirect me there. But I can say
Nah,
for
that's
sure
about
in
right.
Canada and the US, it's like we
Yep.
reuse the soil, reuse it. So the soil is dead, right? It's basically sand. So, healthy, thriving soil has all of these minerals in it, right? It has the magnesium, the selenium, the zinc, all of these things. So I would say magnesium is probably the first thing that I usually put most women on. Minimum is about 400 milligrams of usually magnesium glycinate or bisglycinate. Highly bioavailable. I also, if a woman is complaining about sleep, which many women do in their 40s, we can also pair that with a magnesium L-threonate, which is a type of magnesium that crosses the blood-brain barrier, and it can have a calming effect in the evening when taken like 45 minutes to an hour before bedtime. So I would say magnesium initially. I would also say particularly for women in perimenopause, a really good omega-3 is very important as well. I think that as we are aging, we want to be thinking about heart disease. Still the number one, it's not breast cancer, ladies. It is cardiovascular disease is the number one killer for women. So we want to be thinking about our heart health. So that is facilitated through the resistance training and the nutrition that we've been talking about, the cardiopulmonary work. And you can also in the kitchen be having things like things that are like fatty fish and an omega-3 supplement. So I'd love an omega-3 supplement for women, somewhere between 2 to call it 4 grams daily. 2 grams is usually appropriate for most people. Those are like the big two. I like vitamin D as well, depending on if I look at her, if I'm looking at her labs and her vitamin D is low, we might supplement with vitamin D. But honestly, if she's living in a warm, like I've had women who I've cared for that live in Florida, which is typically, sunny most of the year, and they've been vitamin D deficient. So it's usually if you can get out in the sun, that is the best form of vitamin D, and it's free. You don't have to buy it in a bottle, but get out into the sun, and your body will synthesize vitamin D on the surface of the skin, and then it can translate to the blood from there. So those are kind of the top three. I'm trying to think if I'm missing anything, but like I'm typically a supplement minimalist.
Yeah,
I
same.
don't like to take 5,000 pills a day, but depending on what the patient might be presenting with, like if she's presenting with low energy, we might think about supporting mitochondrial health. You might think about an NAD supplement. There are many different ways that we can, skin a cat, as the saying goes. But I would say that the top three would be magnesium, omega-3s, and a vitamin D.
And creatine, would you throw that into the mix?
Oh God, thank you for
That's
saying
just
that.
for everyone across
Yes.
the board, though, isn't it? Yeah, no, I was thinking there's
Yes.
one we've missed here. They're really helpful, those ones, but yeah.
That's the one. That's the one. Yeah. Creatine monohydrate.
Yep.
Absolutely. And just before anyone says, but will it make me gain water? No.
Yeah,
The
that's a good point.
what it's like, will I get bloated? No, what's going to happen is the creatine is going to actually you're going to pull water inside the muscle cell.
Yeah,
So what does that
intramuscular.
do to your muscle? It
Makes you
makes
look
your
better.
muscles full. Yeah, it
Yeah.
makes you look jacked. Like, that
More,
nice
more
pump that you get
toned
at
and
the end of the
sculpted,
workout.
yeah?
Totally. Yeah. And then there's a lot of, when we think about creatine, particularly monohydrate, like none of this proprietary blend bullshit, but pardon my,
No, go ahead. That's
swearing.
fine. I swear a
But
lot.
yeah, so the creatine monohydrate also has been, and there's a lot of really cool literature around the brain benefits of creatine as well. So for women who are walking into a room and they don't know why they walked in there, or they're constantly losing their phone, constantly losing their keys, brain fog, really slow to kind of get started in the morning. It takes them an hour or so with 2, 3 cups of coffee to get started. The creatine can really help with brain metabolism. And it's also been shown to be very protective for mood and affect. So if someone has an affinity for, or is more susceptible to depression and anxiety, creatine is not a substitute for medication if that's required, but it can be used as an adjunct, and it has an incredible safety profile. It's been studied for years and years and years and years and years. So, and as far as I'm aware, I don't actually think that there's any upper tolerable limit. Like, I think that you sort of saturate the myocyte, you can do 5 grams daily for about a month, or if you want to sort of do 10, 20 grams for like 5, 6 days, you're just gonna like, there's no danger to overdoing it.
Yes, the ultimate supplement. And then we haven't even talked about the performance stuff that you get with that. And it's one of
Oh
the most
God,
researched
yes.
supplements, isn't it? It's insane.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
creatine, lovely. Glad we touched on that. So yeah, just to kind of wrap this up, I know you mentioned mindset.
Yes.
With aging women in particular, is there
Yeah.
anything that comes to mind? I know you've covered, obviously, I'm going to plug your book in the show notes. So people need to get your book, right? And we'll touch on that at the end.
Yes.
Mindset.
Please do. Yeah.
Yeah, do it.
I
I'm going to
think
get it
I think
myself.
I think mindset it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. I would really classify mindset as developing and forging resilience. So it's not that life gets easier. And in fact, many women in their 40s and 50s actually find that life can get much harder, because now we have teenagers, and any parent knows that like the mouthy teenagers are much harder to deal with than the cute little toddlers that they were just a few short years ago. So we have sort of that stress. We have the stress of our parents aging and having, probably being the primary caregiver, taking them to their doctor's appointments, making sure they're not mixing their medications, all that. Seeing their parents age and potentially deteriorate can be also very emotionally stressful. So I would think that aging in some ways can be more complicated. We start to contemplate our own mortality. It's like, oh my God, I'm 45. Like, the stats say that I've like lived more than half my life at this point, right? So I think that the mindset piece is around developing grit and resilience to be able to deal with whatever life happens to be throwing at you. And so that can take a lot of different forms. A lot of women really like, and it can just be very simple, little small meaningful moments in the day. So one of the ways, like personally, I can give you an example. One of the ways that I like to start my day off is usually with a nice cappuccino on my porch in the morning, just like listening to the birds and the bees and the bugs in the summer, in the summertime, and in the fall, it's just like the rustling of the leaves. For me, that's like a wonderful day, a wonderful way to start the day. For many women, they find meditation very helpful. I like to walk as well, like walking, even though it's considered movement, in my opinion, one of the most underrated exercises, for fat loss, and for also if you are sort of catastrophizing everything and you go for a walk around the block, all of a sudden that problem, seems a bit more manageable. So thinking about ways that you can mitigate your stress. A lot of people think that relaxing is, plopping in front of Netflix at the end of the day and just watching, whatever, binge watching whatever the latest thing is. I would argue that those things steal your attention. So we talked about currencies, right? Steal, like we pay for things with money. We pay for things with our muscle, right? Our muscle is like the regulatory currency of the body. And we also, when we're thinking about mindset, things like Netflix and doom scrolling on Instagram at the end of the day and checking everyone's Facebook status or whatever, all of that steals from you. It steals from your goals. It steals from your dreams. When something is free, like having an Instagram account or, Netflix, I know you need to pay for it, but you can watch, there's no upper limit to what Netflix will allow you to watch. they are stealing from you. And so when we start to develop some boundaries and definition around what it is that we want, then some of the things like the doom scrolling and the Amazon hauls and the latest bag and the makeup or whatever it is suddenly becomes much less important because we are, in our 40s and 50s, maybe more cognizant of time, and that the hourglass is now, starting to, it's been flipped and it's on its way out. So it can take a lot of different forms, but I think the through line there is grit and resilience.
Love that. And just to wrap that up, this is a whole nother rabbit hole, right? In terms of distractions,
Yeah.
phone. Like
Yeah.
you don't even, I can't even express it in words how much time people waste, right? Obviously scrolling everything else on their phone. And I have the same issue. Like I should be outsourcing this, but like on YouTube, I have this thing where I'll check the numbers and stuff. And I know, okay, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
Even that, I don't scroll, I don't consume, but I use it as, oh yeah, I got to check. And
Yeah.
I'm fully aware of it, right? And I still do it. It's like, those things are designed to get us addicted, right? And they steal, like you say, they rob us of our energy and things we could be doing to really have a better quality of life, I guess, right?
Yeah, yeah. If you ever want a wake up call, you can go into your phone, I think it's in the screen settings, and you can look at how much time you spent on like entertaining apps like an Instagram or a Facebook or, insert whatever, YouTube, whatever it is. And just like, even if it's like 6 hours, 7 hours a week, right? Which would be about an hour a day, which most people are far north of that. Just think about what you could do in 7 hours a week. Like if you wanted to change your body composition, or you wanted to learn a new language, or you wanted to plan a trip, or you wanted to plan a dinner party, or anything that would initiate communication, joy, anything that would make you happy. Think about what that time that you're wasting, because it is wasted time, that you're not any better off for it. I have this conversation with my 13-year-old all the time because we're trying to regulate. He's always on Snapchat. Snapchat is the app for, for his kind of
Youngsters. Yeah.
generation. And
TikTok.
it's like they all have, like, that's how they all communicate with each other. They don't text, they don't
Yeah.
do any of that. It's all on Snapchat.
Wow.
So it's like, all right, what can you do instead? Like my boys like to play soccer. It's like, what, like, could you improve your, your ability, like your keep ups? Could you improve your speed, your explosive power, your your first touch on the ball, all these different things that are important for their soccer. It's like, if you spend 7 hours a week on Snapchat, what if you spent 7 hours, training soccer? Like, how much of a better soccer player would you be by the end of the season? So that's just for a 13-year-old. But if you think about that for a perimenopausal woman, most women are like, oh my God, I'm gaining weight and I don't know how. Or, oh my God, I'm so depressed and I have a loving husband and a beautiful house and I shouldn't feel this way. Well, check your habits, right? How are you starting off your day? Are you rolling over and checking your phone? Are you bookending the day again in the evening with a glass of wine and doom scrolling and looking at the Amazon haul or the whatever, because all of that stuff is taking away from your joy. It doesn't add to it. So, yeah, I mean, maybe that's a separate conversation, but
No, it
I've
is,
thought
but that
a
was
lot about it
gold.
and very deeply about it, because a lot of women in their 40s do feel like the pressure of time, and they feel sad. And part of that, I think, is that they're not moving in the way that they're not moving in the direction that they want. They're seeing these changes in their bodies that are undesirable and unfavorable, and they feel hopeless. So what do? They just get on their phone and scroll. But you can completely have agency. You can completely control the outcome there. We just have to set some boundaries.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, love that. Love that. And I was just thinking then, because we want to have kids hopefully in like a couple of years' time. And that's my biggest
Wonderful.
fear. Is like, how do you govern the technology thing, but then obviously
Ah,
not restrict them too
yeah,
much? Because it's
yeah.
not like, you see that happen a lot, don't you, with other substances and, people, if you're too strict with your kids and everything else, you see them,
Yeah.
'cause we're rebellious by nature, aren't we? Anyway, that's another conversation. Thanks so much for your time. So much gold in there. And that's why, based on what you were saying then, saying I don't have time to take care of yourself, it's not going to fly with us, right? If you just look at your screen time, you do have time. It just comes down to the time you're wasting and time management.
You
Where,
make time for what's important. You make time for what's
simple as that.
important to you, right? Yeah.
100%. Simple as that. Where can the audience find you? I'll add this in the show notes, and your book, The Betty Body. People need to get that.
Yeah. So thank you so much. So the podcast is called Better with Dr. Stephanie. We have a weekly show, probably like this, where we have thought leaders and scientists and doctors from all over the world talking about meals and muscle and mindset and just how to live, what does it mean to have a well-lived life. That's free. You can find me on Instagram, Dr. Stephanie Estima. And as you mentioned, Amazon and most good bookstores will have the book. It's called The Betty Body. And that is for women who are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s who are thinking or looking to optimize their menstrual cycle along with their eating and their exercise habits.
Awesome. I'm going to order this now before our Europe trip so we can read it on our trip.
Awesome.
Great stuff. Thanks again for your time, Steph, and have a good evening.
Thank you so much. This has been a delight. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.